You want to make a board game, but how do you make a board game? I'm not talking about playtesting or art or any of that. I'm talking about manufacturing. How do you work with a manufacturer to turn that beautiful idea in your head or on some index cards covered in Sharpie into a real marketable board game product? That's where Panda Game Manufacturing comes in. They're one of the most famous board game manufacturers out there. Asmodee's used them, as has Stonemaier, Z-Man, GMT, Leader Games, and a whole bunch of other huge publishers. So that's why I've brought on Tyler Lipchen, Senior Project Manager and Prepress Specialist at Panda. Now, it's funny, I had pitched the idea of an interview with the topic of a crash course in manufacturing board games when I was working with Panda on this. Turns out they had a slideshow already made, ready to go, that was almost a word-for-word match on what I was looking for. I couldn't ask for any better, so they're going to do that slideshow today. Now, we're going to cut to that in just a minute, but real quick, my name is Brandon. This video is brought to you by Fulfillerite. We ship orders for e-commerce and crowdfunding. Link below for more details, and quotes are always free. Now, one last quick note. I edited this one with a light touch because we just want to keep it simple and lo-fi and honest. Just like two professionals on a Zoom call, but this time with screen sharing. So, all right, let's cut to the interview. So, yeah, thank you again for coming on. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, no worries.
Yeah, I love that you just happen to have exactly the kind of thing that we wanted to cover anyway, just sitting around in your Google Drive ready to go. I couldn't have asked for better.
Yeah, we get asked the question a lot. So, yeah, we've definitely come prepared.
Yeah, you're ready for it. I like that. We can jump into this thing whenever you're ready.
Yeah, sounds good. Sounds good. So this is our crash course in tabletop game manufacturing. This is an introduction to Panda's process in particular, but this process will be very, very similar for any mass production supplier. The first part of it, we'll kind of go through the whole process, but some parts of it will be more geared towards like a print on demand. But the majority of this presentation will be for a full mass production facility. My name is Tyler. I'm from Panda, as you know. I am a senior project manager and pre-press specialist. So I kind of handle projects from the consultation quoting phase all the way through to I run pre-press checks and design verification. And then I actually manage a project all the way through to completion, even help with some shipping as well. So that's who I am. But let's get into the production process because that's why you're all here. So there we go. So this is a typical manufacturing process. So you will reach out at the beginning of your journey, whether you're in the middle of a game design or you're planning a crowdfunding campaign or you're a publisher who has a product that you've kind of gotten past alpha testing. So like you've been play testing it, you have a good idea of the specifications of how many cards you need, how big your board has to be. You have a working prototype that could be a mass production game eventually, right? That's kind of when you want to reach out for quotes with manufacturers because otherwise too much is in flux and you make it an estimate that's not really accurate. So the first part of the process is reaching out for a quote, and I believe you should reach out for a quote once you have a working prototype. And then you just match specs. So reach out for a quote. You can do it there are some online estimator tools. Panda has an estimator tool on our website. So you can use that to start if you want just a rough estimate, or you can reach out to us directly for a quote. At that point, you'll be put in touch with a project manager like myself, who will review your specifications. There are ways you can input specifications into our website, or if you have like an Excel document or something, you can also work with your project manager to fill out your specs that way. Someone like me and myself, again, a project manager, will review your specifications. We'll look out for things that don't quite match, like maybe the components don't fit inside your box, or maybe you've kind of asked for something that's a little bit kind of whether we can do it or not. We'll kind of look for any kind of hedge cases, any tweaks we can make. And also during that initial stage, we might make some suggestions on certain materials, more of some like cost saving suggestions if you want. There's also a bit of consultation for crowdfunding, which we'll talk about kind of at the end of the presentation, where there's a little bit of extra consultation that goes along with that. But generally speaking, you'll speak to one of us or you'll send in your specs and we'll provide a quote. Now, once you're happy with the quote and you want to sign the quote and you've solidified your quantities, then we go into the next stage, which is called design verification, which will be checking your files. After that, we go into pre-production. which will be kind of digital printed sample of your game and any samples of any source components, which are non-printed components. Then mass production, then assembly, and then shipping. And that is kind of the whole process from start to finish. I want to go through each of those points in detail, and then we'll give you some tips and tricks and some more information on crowdfunding in particular at the end of the presentation as well.
Now, I do have a brief question about the manufacturing manufacturing process more broadly, and that is, I'm seeing more and more people are doing this kind of design for manufacturing kind of process where they get really smart about it and they figure out what is actually feasible in terms of cost before they get too hung up on any idea. Now, it sounds like your online pricing calculator can already help people with that to some extent, but do you have additional resources that can help people in that scenario?
Yeah, for sure. No, it's a really good idea to as you're building a tabletop game, is to consider manufacturing. We actually have a presentation called Game Design with Manufacturing in Mind that goes through it in detail. But because you're building a product, and because it has to take up a physical space, it's actual physical thing. Knowing a lot more about kind of your limitations and your opportunities with certain components is only going to help your design. And the earlier you think about that, the better it's going to be in your final product. So if you go to the Panda website, pandagm.com, and go to tools, there are a lot of tools there that can help you out. We have a graphic design guidebook and a component guidebook and a crowdfunding guidebook, plus templates, template generator, and all sorts of tools that can help you out throughout that process as well. Also, just flipping through the website in general, like we go through each component on the website itself. Just reading through those and getting familiar with them will make a big difference in your game design.
Yeah, that sounds good. And I can't recommend enough that people just get involved early in trying to figure out what stuff costs before they commit really hard to something, because if you get the costs under control early, it makes everything else easier. And as a note for you and me, any of those resources you just mentioned, if you just send me the links after we do this recording, I'll drop those down in the comments. Anybody who's watching this can go to the landing pages or any other resources you may want to link them to.
Yeah, it sounds perfect. Sounds good. There's a slide at the very end that talks about tools as well. So we're kind of jumping ahead of ourselves here, but
perfect. I figured it's
a good question.
A little bit.
It's all good. I'm kind of jumping all over the place already, but that's okay. Like I said, you got lots of questions. A lot of your clients, people you work with, have questions that you're kind of you're kind of their avatar right now, aren't you? Kind of speaking for them. So that's fine. Yeah, we can jump around a little bit if we have to. Awesome. So let's go through the first bit, which was quoting, which I kind of already talked mostly about. But again, we have an estimator tool online. Some other manufacturers may also have estimator tools. You can request a formal quote. Then you'll have a consultation with your project manager, go through the components, again, offer suggestions. And then, of course, there's crowdfunding. We do have a crowdfunding package, which we'll talk about later on in the presentation as well. But for that, we will offer crowdfunding advice, how to particularly look at manufacturing for a crowdfunding project, planning stretch goals and add-ons, and also talk about prototypes and review copies as well, which is very important for crowdfunding. So I'll talk about that a bit at the end. But during this quoting process, that is something that you will be talking about as you're quoting your project for sure. Next up, after you sign the quote, as I said, we go into design verification, and this is prepress. At this point, you will be assigned a dedicated prepress specialist. Again, I'm a dual role. I do project management and prepress. But if your project manager isn't a dual role, you'll be assigned a specific prepress specialist. You'll upload your files to our website. We have a custom-built FTP for all of your files. We'll check your files, provide a prepress report, which will say kind of where there are issues, any suggestions we have. If there's an issue that you need to correct, we'll provide information on how to correct it with screenshots and the whole lot. So we'll send that report back to you. You'll amend the files, re-upload the files to us. We'll check them again. And we'll kind of go back and forth until I'm happy with your files. Once I'm happy with them, I will send them to our factory. They will do another final check and then create digital proofs for you. Once you approve the digital proofs, that kind of finishes the design verification phase, and then we go into pre-production.
Mm-hmm. Do you guys tend to have a lot of back and forth on the pre-press part?
Yep, absolutely.
Okay,
for sure.
And that's want to account for in Kickstarter, right?
Yes, absolutely. Okay. That's probably one of the longest. It can be one of the longest phases in the whole production process because it really depends on your files, how long it takes. It could take 2 weeks. It could take 2 years. Who knows? Depends on your files. But the advantage, of working with Panda, working with someone like myself, is that you have a pre-press specialist on call who will talk you through everything. Right? They'll talk you through how to set up your files if you need to. They'll provide feedback on your files to help you out. And that's really important because again, it can be challenging, especially if you're doing it all yourself. Like if you have a graphic designer who is used to tabletop games, it's a little bit easier because they kind of know what they're doing, and they speak the lingo, right? But if you're doing it yourself, which a lot of first-time creators are, it helps to have a dedicated pre-press specialist to help talk you through these things and help check your files as you go. So don't be too don't be too scared of it. It's not like it's going to delay your project for years and years, so to speak. But it is something that you will likely need some extra support for, particularly on your first project. You will find it's a steep learning curve, but once you do that first project, the reprints are very, very simple compared to a first time project. And even like a new project with an existing client, I find is just so much easier because you've been through the process. You've read the design guidebook. You've had a pre-press report. You know what can be fixed. You don't make the same issues. Don't make the same mistakes twice usually. So it gets the first time budget extra time for sure. But after that, it gets a lot easier and becomes second nature. And you start to set up your files properly. Like when you start a new game design, you know what card sizes you want. You have templates for the bleed and the margins. You know what to look out for. You can start to as an art director, help brief your artist on what you want and work within the restrictions of the components of the media. And that makes a big difference too. You'll definitely find artists and graphic designers who are industry veterans. Their work is phenomenal. Their files are perfect when they come in for design verification. It just goes right through pre-press. It's very smooth, but they work within the constraints that are inherent in the actual processes. But they still make it look good. Right, they have to adhere to bleed on tokens and cards, but they know those margins and bleeds so well that they actually use them to their advantage, which is part of design. That's part of game design, right? Restrictions breed creativity, don't they? That's inherent. So same thing goes with the pre-press files, and again, using a graphic designer who's experienced is definitely worth looking into.
Yeah. I think something just to point out for somebody who's and it's YouTube, we get quite a general audience, but if you've never done a board game file before or any kind of printed marketing or media or whatever, that bleed is basically you have to assume that whatever you make printed is going to have the edges cut off. So you just have to make sure that all of the critical stuff fits within a certain safe zone, and the rest is your bleed and your trim, and that's what that's called. There's neat diagrams for this. I might pop that up on the screen too.
Yeah. And the templates that you get through the template generator on our website does have the margin lines and the bleed lines, and it has a legend to explain what they are and things like that as well. So it's pretty, once you get the hang of it, it gets a lot easier. Like I said, just a bit of a learning curve. Awesome. So going through after design verification, so after the digital proofs are approved, we go into pre-production. So at this point, it says here, this is the final quality control checkpoint before mass production. We will produce a full pre-production copy of your game. That's called the PPC for short. And that is, it's a digitally printed version of your game. So it's used printed using a digital printer, not the offset printers that we use for mass production. But it will be using the same materials and finishes as your final game. Anything that's going to be cut is going to be trimmed with a plotter as opposed to die cuts. This is very complicated. We may opt for die cuts depending on your project manager will determine what's best. But it's going to be a physical version of your game, okay? Kind of like a prototype you'd get at a print-on-demand service. And this is going to be shipped to you, and then your project manager and you are going to have a call. You're going to hop on a video call. You're going to review the game, review the PPC. You're going to play the game a few times with it. You have a video call with your project manager to go through any issues that you have. Now, at this point, if you have any issues, it's fine. It can be fixed. If you find a typo in your rulebook, we just go back to design verification, upload a new rulebook. We check it. Digital proofs are fine, approved, off we go. So at this point, you can make changes if you need to. After this point is when we go into mass production, where it can be a lot more costly. But this is kind of like your last checkpoint before we go into mass production. During this stage, you'll also be getting samples of any non-printed components, which I call source components in this case. But that would be things like dice, wood, wood meeples, wood cubes, plastic cubes, custom plastic minis, metal. Those all have kind of their own process but it's very similar to basic print that we've talked about so far. Like you'll upload your files for like it's a 3D file. We will check it. We will provide feedback. Resculpting feedback if it's a 3D mini or metal or something like that. We will some of the modifications we can do ourselves when it comes to plastic minis or metal. Some of it we might revert back to you. We'll show you what has to be done because it's too big of a change or something like that. But we'll optimize your design files for the manufacturing process, right? It's like we'll check wood. If some parts are too thin and we're very breakable, we'll offer feedback. Say, we should thicken up the legs on this wooden meeple, or the details on this plastic mini aren't going to show, so we should deepen these here, or we should move. The arm is right here. If we move it to like this angle here, then the molds will open easier. Things like that is the kind of advice that we'll offer. I said some things we can fix ourselves for you. Some things might be too much of a change that we want to. We want you to be the one to change it to make sure that it's exactly how you want it. Any of these changes that we do make, we'll always show you in advance, whether it be through a digital file, through email, or through a video call, to make sure you approve any changes that we do make as well for any source components. But once you approve those samples and the PPC, then we move on to mass production. Do you have any questions or comments about pre-production? No, you're good? Okay.
Yeah.
Awesome. So then mass production. At this point, all the paper, the printed components will be printed and die cut. Any of the non-printed components will be produced. And we will make one mass production copy, that's MPC for short, and that will be assembled and sent to you. The MPC is, for all intents and purposes, a retail version of your game. Everything will be die cut, everything will be assembled into the box. You'll have a plastic tray, for example, and it'll be assembled into the tray. Everything will be shrink wrapped and sent to you. The only difference between the mass production copy and the final retail copies are that while we send the MPC to you for you to check, we will be climatizing all of your components in our factory to avoid like warping and any kind of damage from moisture. So while we send the MPC to you, we'll have another video call. You'll unbox it. I always recommend you videotape your unboxing for your MPCs because the way that it was assembled in that box will be how it's assembled for final. At this point, again, you can't really, you can change something, but it'd be costly. If you find a typo at this point or something like that, you'd have to reprint all your rule books if that was the case. But we have so many checkpoints beforehand that rarely ever happens if there's an issue at that point. But one thing we can change is the way things are assembled in the box because nothing's been assembled yet. We've just produced everything. So that's why I say always videotape your MPC unboxing just so you remember how everything was packaged and is how you want it to be packaged. We have a call. We go through the MPC. Everything is approved. We go into final assembly.
Yeah. Are you able to do like runs of, say, 15, 20, 30 if you wanted to send out copies to reviewers?
I will talk about that when we get to the crowdfunding section.
Perfect.
Yeah, don't worry. We'll talk about that in a minute. Cool. So after mass production, this is for the mass production, like, 1,500, 2,000 units we're talking. After that, we go into assembly. That's where we actually assemble everything into the boxes per your instructions. Everything is shrink wrapped. They're packed in the cartons. Cartons go on the pallets. And then when they wait your shipping plan, at this point, they can go into a shipping container. If they're being transported by ocean, they could be packed into cartons to go on airplanes. It all depends on what your shipping plan is. During the mass production process, that's usually quite a lengthy time where there's not a lot for me and you to do. So during that time, we tend to talk about shipping, make sure your shipping plan is in place, talk to Fulfill Right, make sure everything's in, all your ducks are lined up so that when the games do ship, everything is in order from there. So that kind of concludes the entire production process from start to finish. For timelines, as a quick summary, design verification, the time that takes, again, is variable, depends on your files. For a first-time client, first project, plan about 4 weeks. Could be a lot less, could be a lot more. It really depends on your files. Pre-production, but before we start pre-production, that's when your first deposit invoice is due. Again, this could change depending on which manufacturer is. Who your manufacturer is or your relationship with the manufacturer, but typically speaking, the deposit invoice is due before any kind of samples are made. Pre-production, 2 to 4 weeks, depends on the game, depends on the components. Some components might take longer for pre-production, like again, custom metal, custom plastics will normally take longer than that. But dice and wood are quite quick, and so is print for pre-production. Mass production, 8 to 12 weeks. Again, totally depends on the type of components, how many different types of components you have, and your overall order quantity, right? As you can imagine, making 2,000 games is different from making 20,000 games. So mass production can vary. Also depends on the time of year. If your mass production goes over Chinese New Year, for example, our factory is closed. All Chinese factories are closed over Chinese New Year. That might add 3 or 4 weeks to your production process because of the time of the year when you went into production. After that, final assembly, again, 2 to 4 weeks, could be a little bit longer because it depends on the complexity of the assembly and, of course, the order quantity. Once again, assembling 2,000 games, it doesn't take as long as assembling 20,000 games. Assembling a legacy game that has certain components and certain compartments that are sealed, that are in certain parts of the box, that takes a lot longer to assemble than just some shrink-wrapped cards in a tuck box, right? So, again, these are all kind of just overall general, kind of like a pandemic style game where you've got a bit of print, a bit of plastic, that kind of thing all put together, but it can definitely vary. And then of course shipping. In the pre-COVID world, ocean shipping 4 to 6 weeks to the Western US, 6 to 8 weeks to Eastern USA or Europe. Air shipping 1 to 3 weeks. Land shipping 1 to 3 weeks. As usually local to China will be anything that's going to be land shipped for us. Again, if you work with a European manufacturer like in Poland or Germany, obviously land shipping can be anywhere in Europe, so it's a bit different there. But that's kind of the general guidelines. Shipping times as of this recording are actually pretty good. So that's actually pretty accurate at this point in time. But tomorrow it can change. So don't just check out the date stamp when this is posted. Don't quote me on that. So that's the whole production process. Do you have any questions before I move on from there?
I'm with you so far. I mean, this is thorough. You guys have clearly refined this over time to kind of anticipate the questions.
And always, one thing I should mention, I didn't mention it before, is that the final invoice, we said the deposit invoice is due typically before pre-production. The final invoice is due before the game ship. So again, that's something that you'll be talking with your project manager throughout the mass production. You'll be preparing the final invoice. Perhaps if Panda's handling some of your shipping for you, that will be put on your final invoice as well as we discuss your shipping plans and things like that. Awesome. Moving on. So general tips, like I said before, every first project is a learning curve. So build in buffer time to begin with, right? You have to learn how to do a lot of these things as well. Keep usability and user experience in mind at all times. Things like choosing the right colors to avoid any challenges for people who are colorblind. Choosing the right components for the job. Right. We also do a presentation on UX and UI and game design with manufacturing in mind. A lot of information that you can find online about this as well, but always keep the overall experience in mind. Like the way your tray is laid out, like think about how it's going to be stored, how it's going to be used throughout the entire process. Because once again, game design is product design, as I said before. Any game specific requirements you should mention during quoting and consultation. So some games are straightforward, like it's a card game, we need a box, there's a board and the scoring track, whatever. If it's like a legacy game and you want things assembled a certain way or cards in a certain order, that's something that's a bit more unique. So just be sure to mention that. During our consultations, we'll normally ask for like the elevator pitch of the game and ask how it plays, because that helps a lot with what advice we can give. All of us are gamers at Panda. We're all project managers are gamers, so we understand the lingo. If you have like if you're at a convention, like let us play your game, right? Like let us play test with you. If you have a mod on online, like Tabletopia or TTS or something, let us play it. It helps a ton when we're consulting you on the game. It gives us a lot more context as to what you're going for. So anything that's kind of very unique for your game, please mention it to us early. Think about stretch goals and fulfillment early, which we talked about before, and I'll talk about again later. And consider table presence. Do more with less, right? I mean, your table presence is going to sell your game. Board games are viral by nature. There are solo games, yes, but most games are multiplayer. In order to play them with somebody, you have to actually bring them to your table and show them to them. And if your game is very photogenic, games go viral very easily on Instagram and Facebook and social media, right? So consider your table presence at all times, right? That's going to help your game overall, especially if you're crowdfunding or trying to build up an audience at conventions. So some tips and tricks. Cost savings. Materials and options. That is obvious cost saving and what kind of cardstocks you choose and what kind of gray board you're going to choose. As you mentioned before, design with cost in mind is always going to help. Use components in multiple ways if you can. Right, there are certain ways you can you can use cards to keep score, like Bonanza, right? The back of the card is how you keep your points, your scores, right? Think about multiple functions for certain components. Maximize your printing sheets, right? Cards print on a big, giant sheet. Your standard poker-sized cards, 63 by 88 millimeter cards, print 54 cards per sheet. Well, there's 54 cards in a card deck. So if you print 55 cards, you're going to have to do 2 full sheets of, you're going to use 2 sheets. So use 54 cards, right? Or, max yourself out if you can. If you have 50 cards in your game, well, you kind of have 4 extra cards to be maybe rules reference cards or something, right? Or maybe they're an advertisement for your next game or something like that, right? So just use that to your advantage. Optimize your punch board die lines as well. With Panda, we make everything bespoke. So we make your die lines bespoke for your punch boards. So utilize them, maximize the space, get the most out of it. Use custom shapes, right? Like double, triple encode your information. So instead of having just a coin that has a 1 and a coin that has a 5, you can make the 5 bigger. You can make it a pentagon instead of a circle, right? Like you can change the shape, change the sizes to help that accessibility as well for no extra cost for manufacturing, at least with us. And then of course minimize the box size. That hint is particularly for crowdfunding. If you want a big shelf, like a good shelf presence for retail, you might want a bigger box than what's needed. But generally speaking, most people want the smallest box size possible because it's going to save you a lot on shipping. Yeah, ocean shipping is dependent on volume. So the smaller your box, the better it's going to be for you overall for shipping.
That's a good tip for order fulfillment as well. The smaller the box, more likely it is to get a price break on literally any kind of shipping, especially if you can get into the smallest possible flat rate box by USPS.
I was going to say flat rates make a big difference, don't they?
Mm-hmm. Oh yeah,
for sure.
Enormous difference.
Yeah, absolutely. Awesome. Time save. Those are cost savings. Talk about some things that can save you on production time. First of all, follow our design guidebook, which I'll talk about later. That's in our tools section on our webpage. Plan your shipping strategy in advance. Again, this helps a lot with any kind of delays. Start sampling as early as possible. Come talk to us early as possible. Start consulting. You can find a lot of times during a consultation on video, we can find a lot of challenges that you're gonna run into. A lot of kind of roadblocks along the way. Kind of pinpoint where in the production process your delays might happen, just by having a chat with one of us. We've seen it before, usually. Use early design verification. I'm going to talk about this when we get to crowdfunding, but early design verification is basically that design verification, that pre-press process, doing that way in advance of actual production, which we'll talk about in a second. And of course, utilize prototype services, which will also help a lot. So I'll get to those when we talk about crowdfunding. One thing to consider as well with manufacturing is using sustainable components. We can make your games FSC certified. So if that's important to you, please chat to us. Sometimes there's an extra cost involved depending on the material, sometimes not. We can replace shrink wrap with alternatives. We have like paper bands for cards. We have paper wrap or wafer stickers for boxes, things like that. You can use a varnish instead of a laminate on your game boards and boxes. So if you use a laminate is like a plastic sheet that goes over top of the print to protect it. Very, very standard for boxes and game boards, but a varnish will make your games a lot more recyclable. You can replace plastic inserts with either molded paper trays like pulp trays or cardboard inserts. And there's going to be plenty more tips to come as we go along. We're constantly trying to find ways to reduce disposable plastics, one-use plastics, things like that. So keep following our website and our social media, and we'll be constantly announcing any advances we have in that regard.
It's getting more cost efficient all the time too.
It is, yes. It's going more standard, right? The more standard it becomes, the more cost efficient it becomes. Cool. Give me just one second. Okay, so the moment we've been talking about for half the presentation is crowdfunding tips. So on our website, again, pandagm.com/tools, there is a crowdfunding guidebook. It is if you're new to crowdfunding and new to the tabletop space in regards to crowdfunding, read this through. It's a quick read. It's just a great introduction to like how crowdfunding works with a tabletop space, because it's a little bit different, the expectations with tabletop games as opposed to other projects. Also, ask your project manager about the crowdfunding package that we offer. So let's talk about that briefly. So we talked about prototypes. We talked a bit about early design verification. So Panda has a crowdfunding package, which is a suite of services that is geared specifically towards crowdfunding projects. So this includes a crowdfunding consultation where we'll have a call with you, talk about your project. We will talk about finding your MVP, your minimum viable product, which is going to be the version of your game that is like the bare minimum that you'll be happy with. That will be your funding goal be based around. That doesn't mean like replace all the plastic minis with cardboard standees, right? It's whatever version of your game is the version that you as a creator are going to be happy with on the market. That could involve a whole lot of plastic minis. It could not, right? It depends on your project. And then also going through all of the stretch goals for that, offering suggestions for stretch goals, any kind of component upgrades, talking through the best materials and finishes for your game in particular, talking about add-ons. If you have like a deluxe game, a retail game that's being produced at the same time, we'll talk about how we can kind of separate the components and how we work assembly for that kind of thing. We'll also offer suggestions on, marketing and fulfillment and shipping and things like that as well. Along with that crowdfunding, that consultations, we will also talk about prototypes. So what will happen is we can do prototypes for your campaign, which you'd use for demos, review copies, convention presence, taking photographs and videos, how to play videos and things like that. It will be digitally printed like your PPC. The cutting could be die cut or plotted, depends on your game. And then any non-printed components, we can also do prototypes for, with the exception of plastic minis. Talk to your project manager. We may or may not be able to do plastic minis, depends on your project. But things like dice, things like wood, simple plastics like cubes and things like that, we can do for prototypes. And the advantage with working with us for prototypes is that everything will be bespoke, right? So if you have custom meeples, we can do those for you for prototypes. If you have custom dice, we can do those for you for prototypes, which will make a massive splash for when you go to reviewers and try to show off your product. I mean, it'll still be a prototype, right? The reviewers will still say this is a prototype, things are subject to change, but it is going to be a very good prototype to show off. The quality is, sometimes I'm amazed by how good it is at the moment. It's only getting better as well. So part of the package will be prototypes. And with that will come early design verification, because of course, in order to print your files, I'm going to have to check your files anyways, right? So I will go through the design verification process. We'll upload the files, we Prepress checks, we'll do digital proofs, all of that, and then do the prototype. And what that will help you out as well, not only you get review copies and things like that, but when it comes to actually produce the game for mass production, we will have gone through the design verification process already. Okay, so some things may change, right? Like the rulebook might change. Maybe you added some cards because there's a stretch goal, so you have to upload a few extra files. But like 80 or 90% of the design verification process has been done already at this point, because you did it for prototypes. You'll still get a PPC because that's for quality control. But because you've already seen the prototypes, which are very, very similar process, again, that pre-production phase goes by a lot faster, right? So if you haven't changed like the dice at all, for example, like we can go to mass production if you approve those samples, because we make them all bespoke anyways. It just saves you a lot on your production process, a lot of time in your production process. So that's the massive advantage of going through manufacturer, your final manufacturer, with all your crowdfunding needs as well in advance. So it's going to save you a lot of time, can save you a lot of costs in some cases in the beginning as well, because you have to pay for prototypes anyways these days, right? For your crowdfunding project. So that is kind of our crowdfunding package and services. That we can also offer things like we can help you with punchboard layouts, with packaging design, plastic tray design to some degree, things like that. We can help you, arrange your die lines on your punch boards, and if you have anything dual layer boards, we can help you with as well as part of that package. So we really help hold your hand, especially if you're new to tabletop games and crowdfunding. It's really nice to have a project manager and pre-press specialist as part of your team to go through that process with you and help you out. So that's what we can help with crowdfunding. Then a couple of tips for crowdfunding is talk to your project manager about your delivery timeline, because again, first-time projects are going to take a lot of extra time. When you go into production, it might cross over Chinese New Year, for example. If you want your games out for Essen or Christmas, you got to really work back from those timelines, and you seem to have a lot less time than you think. If you think like oh yeah, I'm going to launch the campaign now, and in 6 months the game will be arriving in stores. Well, I mean, ocean shipping might take 8 weeks. Well, if design verification takes this many weeks and pre-production, it is, let us know your timelines in advance. We can work backwards and come up with a realistic, conservative timeline for you for your project. Because especially a first-time creator, you don't want you want to be very upfront and transparent and honest with your backers. So knowing it, getting all the information in advance is going to help you a lot to become a reliable creator who will go on to, if you want to build a company out of this, right? You want to build a publishing company, you want to gain that trust from your backers right away. So use us, use your team, and that's what we're here for. We're part of your team, so help use us.
Yeah, no questions here, but I will say that yes, it is tremendously hard to make a board game, and absolutely reach out to a manufacturer early, to get this help, not only with the manufacturing but also with just figuring out the timeline, and a fulfillment center relatively early too, because in terms of two vendors to reach out to early, those are probably the two that if you get everything right and listen to the advice you get early, will save you probably the most time and money and set you on track for that second, third, fourth product launch much, much easier.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. You built the relationship with the partners as well, right? Which helps. I always say there are kind of 4 pillars to your crowdfunding project. Four partners you want to have. The last one will be fulfillment, obviously, shipping fulfillment. Second last one will be your manufacturer. Someone's got to make the game. Then before that, you're going to have to partner with a crowdfunding platform and a pledge manager, right? Whether it be Kickstarter, BackerKit, GameFound. That's a very important part of the process, obviously. It's going to determine how you structure everything. And then before that, before you even launch a campaign, is marketing. That's becoming more and more necessary for a successful project. So working with, some of the crowdfunding platforms offer marketing services like BackerKit does. Working with a program like LaunchBoom, for example, to get that marketing in advance. If you understand those 4 pillars, right? The marketing, the crowdfunding platform, the manufacturing, and the fulfillment, then that's success right there, right? You hit those 4 things and you're good. Do your homework, plan in advance, and don't be afraid to ask questions. Don't be afraid to reach out. That's what we're here for, right? That's literally what we do. So don't be afraid. And there we go. My last point is a great design will go unnoticed without great marketing. So use marketing, not just professional marketing, paid marketing, but just in general, go to conventions, go to proto spiels, go play test your game out in public, post on Board Game Geek, go on social media, join design groups, participate in rules exchanges, join the online playtesting community as well. Give and receive, right? Play test someone's game, have them play test yours. Just be as involved as you can in the board game community. It's a growing industry. It's become bigger and bigger every year, but it's still a very intimate industry. People know each other, by name and by face, right? So get involved in the community as early as possible, and just give as much as you can, because whatever you give, you'll get back as well, right? Don't just do it for the sake of getting back, but the more you contribute to the community, the more we all build a community together, that's why we're literally having this this conversation. Yeah. This video right now is literally that, right? Just give whatever you can to the community, because it only helps it grow, right? We've seen so much so far in the last 15, 20 years, especially, of this hobby, and there's still so much more to see. There's whoever's watching this right now, I can't wait to see your creation when it hits Kickstarter, right, or hits BackerKit. So don't be afraid, to get out there, show your game, talk to people, talk to partners, get involved. So last time we talked about tools. This is the page I promised. There's a link right there, pandagem.com/tools. There's template generators for custom dice and for any print components. Our guidebooks, the design guidebook that talks about how to set up your files for print. So definitely read this. And if you're not doing your own files, send this to your graphic designer. Any graphic designer who is well versed in this book will be your best friend when it comes to the production process for board games. The component guidebook talks about any non-printed components, and of course, there's also the crowdfunding guidebook as well. So you find all that on the tools page. And then we got other resources as well. We have some badges and box markings, and then with the CE logo or the choking hazard logo as well, which, by the way, if you need to safety test your game, please talk to your project manager well in advance. That's a conversation to have very early on. There's also some tools for the Adobe suite. There's a pre-flight profile. You can check your own files for some of the big mistakes we normally see for Prepress. And there's an export profile as well that will help export your files into a printable PDF that is in the color profile that we use for print. So visit the tools page, explore it. There's a lot of good stuff on there. Read through all the guidebooks. And do yourself a big favor.
And link is down there in the description for anybody who wants to access those resources.
Yeah, perfect. And yeah, any questions or information, more information on our website, follow us on social media. You can always reach out on social media as well. Our hello@pandagm.com inbox is manned by people, not by robots. So if you have any general inquiries, just email there. If you want to get put in touch with the project manager, again, just email us there if you want to. We'll set you up with somebody in your time zone, preferably in your time zone or close to it, and hopefully in your native language. We have project managers all over the world. I sound like I'm from America, but I'm actually Canadian, and I live in the UK. Go figure. We have project managers in Germany, in Portugal, in France, the UK, and then, of course, all across America as well. So chances are we'll find somebody in your time zone or close to it that can help you out.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and anybody who's got a question down below, I've asked all mine for the day, and honestly, like you have already like front loaded a lot of the questions and answered those in the slides. But anybody who's got questions, leave them down below in the comments. We'll try and answer as many of them as we can. As the fulfillment center, as folks who've worked in board games, so honestly, if we get stuck, we'll just reach out to Panda and like get a response to your comment as well. Thank you for watching this interview. I appreciate it, and I know that Tyler at Panda does too. Details on both our companies are in the description. And just in case you missed the name earlier, my name is Brandon, here on behalf of Fulfillrite. If you need help shipping your orders, go to fulfillrite.com and request a quote. We've shipped for thousands of crowdfunding campaigns before, and we're happy to help you ship yours too. The quote doesn't cost a thing, so if nothing else, you get some good information about pricing. Link in the description. If you enjoyed this video, please take a moment to like and subscribe. Don't forget to slap some postage on that bell so we can express ship new videos to you as soon as they drop. And last but not least, if you have any questions, leave a comment below. I will personally answer as many as I can. Thanks for watching.